So the first question we have is someone is wondering, they have a diploma in accountancy and they're wondering what program they're eligible for. And this sort of raises an interesting question in that what happens if you have a bachelor's degree and what happens if you have a diploma degree? Are you eligible for the same master's program? So Mario or Tammy?
I think I'll let Tammy take this one.
I can say from the University of Lethbridge's minimum requirements is that a 4-year bachelor's degree is required. If they have a diploma, I normally encourage them, if the University of Lethbridge is their school of choice, their destination of choice, to come and take at least a 1-year certificate program that we offer here to help with their, maybe they're a little bit lacking in the theoretical side of things, which you miss from getting a diploma versus a degree. But normally it's a 4-year bachelor's degree is what's required as a minimum requirement.
Perfect. I think my only word of advice to this person is to check the prerequisites for a lot of the master's and PhD programs. As Tammy has rightly said, you might not necessarily have all the prerequisite courses if you've done a diploma program. So sorry, they've just added here that it's a 3-year diploma program, but once again, I think you would need to check what the prerequisite requirements are and to make sure that even in your 3-year diploma program, if you have met them, then I don't see any harm in asking to see if that would be suitable. But when in doubt, I always encourage our students to ask.
Yeah, and in some cases, some schools may have, what do you call it, like a preparation year where if you don't have all the requirements, you may be asked to take an extra year, basically, of studies where you're in a conditional acceptance period. Definitely my friend who took a year off and then considered social work, she didn't have all the requirements because her specialization was in psychology. So she ended up going to McGill, but what happened was she got accepted into a conditional 1-year program prior to her master's of social work. So she took a bit of some coursework and things just to see, just to get all the requirements that she needed, and also for the school to figure out whether she could achieve at the master's level. So that option may be available for you, but in many cases that's something you would need to clear up with the school. So definitely, if you have any questions about whether your diploma program is transferable and whether you can take your like a master's program as your next step, contact the school to find out more information, and perhaps they might have some other options available for you.
Perfect. We have another follow-up question related to this, where someone has said that undergraduate degrees from Europe, notably in the UK, are 3 years. Does that mean you're not eligible? As a UK grad, I will say no, because the degree you end up in the UK, even if it's 3 years versus the 4+ years that you have here, if it's a bachelor degree, then that's sort of what counts. If in the UK, it's such that you get your bachelor's degrees in 3 years rather than 4 years, but as it is a bachelor's degree, you'll still meet that prerequisite. However, if you have a diploma degree, as we've discussed, you might need to check if you have the possible prerequisites. The next question we have, which is also related to studying outside of Canada or even within Canada, is in French universities, will academic papers still need to be submitted in English? Seeing as the majority of peer-reviewed journals are in English. So perhaps if you're looking to pursue your studies in Quebec and the course is in French, they're wondering if the course will be in French or you submit in English. So no, Tammy, Mario, do you guys have any thoughts? We do sometimes come across questions we can't answer, so I don't know if this is one of them.
Well, I don't have much experience in that area, but I can offer a couple of ideas. Typically, and from having some friends go through a couple of places in Quebec, one's at University of Montreal and the other one's at Laval, and if you take the course and submit your work in French, from what their experience is. However, sometimes it's at the discretion of the professor, so you can submit it in either language. I do know at the University of Ottawa, if you're going up for an MA degree, you must take a course in whatever language you're weaker in. So if you're an English student coming in and you prefer English, you have to take one course in French and also submit in French. So it just varies from institution to institution, and I would probably, and from program to program, so what I would recommend is to ask the departmental advisor in that program that specific question.
Yeah, that was going to be my advice as well, is get in touch with that program coordinator, administrator, and get that information straight from them. They'll be the most knowledgeable person to ask.
Perfect. The next question we have is related to funding. So their first question is, are there schools with tuition waivers, and why are fees so much for international students? So I know that at the University of Lethbridge, the feature scholarship that we had for domestic students, there's also a counterpart for international students. So Tammy, I don't know if you want to shed some light.
You know, to be honest, I have no idea why international fees are doubled. But yes, like was said, our fellowships that we offer are also doubled for international students. So instead of the $9,600, they get $19,200 in fellowships. So they kind of even out in the wash, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have yet to find an answer as to particularly why international students are charged double. I'm assuming there's a little more work that goes into evaluating transcripts and that sort of thing.
Right. I do know in some situations, at least on the undergraduate level, I'm not sure if this applies to the graduate level, but sometimes domestic students have a bit of a government subsidy to help them with their tuition, which is why, at least for me as an international student studying in the UK, the reason I had higher fees is because the government subsidy wasn't there to make up the difference. So I paid what a normal student would pay, whereas a domestic student would pay the amount after the government had paid. So sometimes that is the reason for international students having a higher fee. With regards to tuition waivers, that can sometimes depend on the scholarship or the opportunity. I know, for example, for the scholarships at the University of New South Wales and at Lethbridge, that sometimes the scholarship amount is the exact amount of your tuition. So in effect, if you win it, it's like having a tuition waiver. So I don't know if that helps.
Also, a lot of the time, if you do get a lot of research funding and research grants, depending on how much that all adds up, that some of it can be taken for your tuition, but a lot of it is supposed to be for your research, in which case it sort of balances out. It depends on how the books balance, I guess. That's probably a better way to answer that question.
The next question we have is, how lucrative are teaching assistantships?
That varies from institution to institution. If you're looking for an exact number, it does vary, and it could be anywhere from $7,000 to about, I think, $9,600 or $10,000 Canadian. But it varies, and typically the number of hours per week on a TA will vary anywhere from 10 to 16, depending on the institution as well. And in that process, and you could be leading a tutorial, you could be leading labs, marking labs or term papers, assisting the professor preparing for class, or any types of work that way. But the hours are fairly strictly regulated as well, because after all, you're there to do your studies and everything else. The TA is something to help enrich the actual study experience.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't rely on TA or RA work to supplement your studies. It's more of the experience you're gaining than the actual money in your pocket.
Perfect. Another question we have is, someone is looking to pursue medical school after their undergraduate program, but they're wondering, if I don't get into medical school immediately after my undergrad, would it be useful to go to grad school, or maybe do a year of research, volunteer, or work before I apply again? I will give my advice from a friend that was in a similar boat to you, in that they didn't apply for medical school immediately after their undergraduate degree because they hadn't quite figured out that that's what they wanted to do. And what she instead chose to do is she's currently doing a one-year master's at Tufts University, which I think is in sort of the biomedical field. And how that has been helpful for her is a lot of what's covered in the master's program will help her to study for the MCAT, but will also prepare her very well for her first year of med school. So she's using this time to make it easier for her to do the MCAT and then also once she gets to med school. But I would certainly recommend doing something in the field you're looking towards. I think doing a year of research or volunteering at a hospital will only strengthen your application once you do go to med school. And it might give you some sort of hands-on experience as well, and also maybe give you the opportunity to see if this is really the field you're looking to pursue. I know with medical school as well, eventually you'll have to choose what sort of specialization you'd like to go into, so it might be a useful time to research in and do some reading or homework or look in and watch certain of those specific fields to see what you're interested in. I don't know if anybody has anything else to add.
Yeah, there's also some pre-med programs. Some schools do offer a pre-med program, and that might be something you might want to take that time to put your time towards if that's a financially viable option for you. And as Faiza mentioned, yeah, getting some experience and getting all the tools you need in order to succeed in your MCAT exam is just one of that. And also to brush up on interview skills, because med schools do require an interview component as well, and that's something you may want to approach.
One item that I might just want to add to that is to, if you don't get in and if you have the opportunity or try to find the opportunity to seek out someone to take a look at your actual application file and suggest and point out some areas that could use some improvement as well, and then work on those areas over the next year. If that is really what you want to do, is to get into med school, and perhaps strengthen those over that time frame. And I think a few suggestions have been put forth to that end, such as volunteering at a clinic or hospitals, or a year pre-med, or doing an MA in a related field to help prepare you for it as well. So those are all some good ideas in there to help you eventually achieve your goal.
Perfect. The next question we have is a student from Ghana, where the language of teaching is in English entirely. So they're wondering if they need to take an English language test, so a TOEFL type test, before they apply for a master's or a doctorate program.
At the University of Lethbridge, the completion of a bachelor's degree where the mode of instruction and all the coursework was done in English does satisfy the English language requirements, so TOEFL or an IELTS wouldn't be required at that point.
And I would agree with that as well for most institutions, but I would highly recommend that you, whatever program you want to apply to, seek out the advice from that coordinator of that program. Ask them directly, do I need to actually take these or not, and tell them your specific situation, and then follow their advice.
Perfect. The next question we have is from a student saying, if the GRE is optional for the course they're looking to pursue, would you recommend writing it? The GPA for their undergrad is fairly good. So Tammy, I don't know if you could help us out with that one.
The GRE is optional. I guess that depends on, I guess, probably mostly your financial situation. They're expensive exams to write. I always tell the students, you know, even if they didn't, even if the TOEFL or the IELTS, like we were talking about earlier, wasn't required, but they wrote it anyway, I tell them to submit those scores. It only strengthens their application. So I would advise to go for the GRE, even if it is just optional. Shows you're very passionate about what you want to do, and only adds strength to an application.
Perfect. We have a final question here from someone who is also in Ghana, who is currently pursuing an undergraduate 3-year diploma degree in civil engineering, and they're wondering if they're eligible to apply for graduate studies after they've completed, I guess, their conversion transfer out of the University of Northampton. So I think that's a little bit similar to the previous question we had about diplomas, and my advice would be to ask and to check with the institutions, see again if you've met the various prerequisites. Then you can also check to see what course what type of degree you end up finishing with. If from the University of Northampton you end up with a bachelor's degree and that's the only prerequisite, then you are eligible for it. But if you end up with a diploma degree and a different type, then you might need to check in. But I would recommend asking. I don't know if you have anything to add?
No, just contacting the specific program you're interested in applying to. Contact them directly and just ask them. I get many emails a day with scanned copies of transcripts with students asking for me to take a look at it first before they actually apply. So a lot of schools will do a little pre-check for you.
Perfect. And I think that wraps up all the questions we have today. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to Tammy and Mario for joining us today and presenting their various sections and offering helpful advice and tips on what to do with your graduate application. We certainly appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day, and we hope you found the presentation to be useful. Speaking from us here, we definitely did. We've learned a thing or two, and hopefully we'll be able to present a strong graduate school application when the time comes.